Welcome to Rome. This is The Bittersweet Life with Katie Sewell and Tiffany Parks. Hello, this is The Bittersweet Life. I'm Katie Sewell.
I'm Tiffany Parks.
Tiffany in Rome, Katie in Seattle. And today we are not alone. We are joined by a guest that we have wanted to have on this show for at least the last 5 years, if not the full 10 that we've been broadcasting. It wasn't that she refused us, we just never got it together. But today, that ends. And Tiffany, I'm going to pass it over to you to introduce our wonderful guest today.
Yes, today we're talking with Georgette Jupe, who is a writer and the founder of the famous blog Girl in Florence. So if you don't know her by her name, you probably know her by Girl in Florence, because she is that girl in Florence. But she's originally from San Antonio, Texas, and has lived in Florence for well over a decade, but with a little bit of a innuendo. No, not an innuendo. That's not the right word. What am I trying to say? A little break.
Interlude?
In Switzerland. An interlude. Thank you.
Interlude.
My English is terrible. But yeah, so she wears a lot of hats. She's a freelance writer, social media consultant, and I just can't wait to start this off and to talk with you about your experiences.
So excited to be here. I'm a huge fan of you guys as well because it's not so much Italy content. I'm like, oh, everybody just makes it seem like it's this perfect place 24/7. And I like people to keep it real. So thank you, ladies, for doing what you do.
Aw, thank you.
Thank you. So can we start with the basics, just for people who have never heard of you? How do you end up becoming Girl in Florence? Like, how do you become synonymous with Florence when you come from Texas?
I feel like it's SEO before its time when I came up with the name because really it was completely random. So my journey in Florence actually started in 2005 when I studied abroad, like so many other girls in Florence, hence the name. So yeah, I was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas. I've always wanted something else, and I never knew exactly, what life would bring. I think I had starry eyes for wanting to live in New York, and then somehow I ended up in LA. And I had this experience where I was teaching English in China for 2 months in 2005, and I got this opportunity to study abroad right after that. And it was kind of a whirlwind. Like, you have those years in your life where so much of your life changes, and that was definitely one of those years for me. And, to be honest, when I first got the news that I was accepted into the study abroad program, I was originally disappointed because I wanted to go to the UK. I was studying political science, and that's not exactly something that you think of when you think of Italy, although maybe during the modern times it seems more apt. But Italy was never on my radar. So that always surprises many people because I think, most people that come and live in Italy, it's kind of a lifelong dream. And it's not usually an accident, or they have Italian heritage or something like that. So for me, it was a happy accident, but I always credit that as being one of the reasons why I feel like Italy has always been the right place for me, because I just never had these expectations. I didn't have this kind of like dolce vita. I'm going to go meet a Fabio and, my life's going to be changed and, I'm going to live there forever. Like, honestly, I was like, it's going to be a year abroad. I'm going to have some fun, hopefully learn some Italian, eat some good food, and come back to LA and, resume what I'm doing. So I never thought that I would be living. I mean, now it's been 15 plus years. And then we had a couple of years in Switzerland, but I really felt like, I've always felt like Italy and Florence is home, and not that Texas never was, but it's just, this is like my chosen home, like what I personally have always felt I belong, and the chaos and the creativity and the oxymorons of daily life, like, is something that I really resonate with, and maybe even more so after 3 years in Switzerland. And about Girl in Florence, like so many people, when, I came back in 2007, 2008, and I was kind of writing here and there. I've always been somebody who journals and likes to pen down my thoughts. And I really just felt like I needed an outlet. I mean, I felt like there was either people that were studying or people that were older, had families, and there weren't many people in between like me at that time. And I just felt like I needed that outlet. So I started the blog. I started writing about funny things that I discovered in Italy, the cultural mishaps that I was personally experiencing. And, there was a time when we were doing blogging round tables. I know you guys were all into that world as well. And it felt like a really cool world. Like I miss that. Like I'm nostalgic for the time of being really honest and candid about things and not everyone like vying to be an expert 24/7, like,
Uh,
commodify Italy at every turn. Like it just feels I feel like at that time it was just like, yeah, we're sharing and I'm gonna listen to you and you can listen to me and it kind of it blossomed from there, from around 2010, 2012 is when I
Yeah.
launched a blog and it's all been a journey since then.
hmm. Wow.
So when you were in Florence as a student, was that
Hmm.
when you decided this is my place? I've got to find a way to come back here? Or did it happen after you got back home and you started missing it? How did you leap from being a study abroad student to moving here permanently?
I think that I had always had thought, okay, maybe I would love to live in Europe. There's something about being in a place that you can walk, something I never experienced growing up in the South in America. So already that changed my life completely. And I'm like, I need to find a way to get back here. Then going back to Los Angeles to finish my degree, I just couldn't, like it wasn't the same anymore. I think this happens to so many people when you come back and you're like, okay, yes, I miss my iced coffee and air conditioning or whatever, all that BS. But then after a while, I just felt like this is not home. I need to go back to Italy and I need to find a way. And I had no plan. Like there was no remote worker visa at this time, It
Mhm.
was kind of like, yeah, good luck with that. Every time I asked for advice on visas and at the time I was also dating an Italian guy, so there was that element too. But I really thought of it as like, okay, we'll see. Like let me go back, let me finish my degree in LA, come back to Italy and see what happens without really having any plan at all. Probably wasn't the smartest idea, but I was like, you know what? Let's give it a go. I don't think I want to do PR crisis management in Los Angeles anymore. Like I think I had too many stints of working with really entitled D-list actors that I was like, no, I'd rather just live with the chaos of Italy, more than somebody like demanding me you get them coconut milk at 12 a.m. or something.
Oh, wow.
So quite the juxtaposition. Yeah, so then I came back and it was not easy at all. Like I don't pretend that I came back to this like cushy situation where everybody was like, "Benvenuti, torre, sei tornato." It was a mess from day one. I didn't know what I was doing, and I had to hustle and work 100 different jobs, teaching English, being a nanny. I worked in a leather shop for 2 weeks. Like just every kind of way that you could possibly be exploited as a person or a worker, I probably experienced.
Oh my
But it
gosh.
did make for funny stories.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, can you give us an example? I mean, we were just recently on a bonus episode talking about Tiffany being living in a terribly unsafe situation because of her status as just trying to make it work in Rome. I mean, do you have any examples of, or an example
Oh
of
my
something?
gosh. Well, one that stands out is I was working for before Airbnb, which we can chat about later if you want. But everybody kind of when they came to Italy, you stayed in a hotel or you stayed in a vacation rental. Like an agency would hook you up with an apartment. And it was completely different than the way things are now. And the main tool for getting and I was working for a lady who had her office in Piazza della Signoria, and she, it was like a completely everything was like weird and strange. But she's like, okay, well, you're American, you're going to connect with the clients that stay in the part. And I've always worked in that kind of ambiance of being customer service and just sort of being a liaison between Italy and the US. So I actually found it really thrilling to kind of like, help people on their journey to come stay in Italy. And maybe they're staying in the apartment in Santa Croce for 2 weeks or a month. I was making, only commission. It was full time, nothing truly official. But I was just so desperate at that point to work a quote unquote real job and put a transition from like the teaching English nannying roles that I had done when I first came back, that I was like, okay, I'm game for this. And I became really good at it, and I started booking more and more people in the apartments, and I was using Craigslist. If you guys remember
I
Craigslist,
remember Craigslist very well.
the,
Too well.
the people's place, the people's website. love Craigslist still. It's just the most bizarre place on the planet, and I love it for that reason.
For sure.
Yeah, I would find all the people through there. It was great. And what happened was one day, I just, this lady, my boss at the time, just would fly off the handle all the time. Everybody, at the clients, at me, and my coworker, and at first I was like, well, maybe this, Italians are passionate. This is probably normal. I just have to like get over it. Get a little tougher. I've always been a bit of a people pleaser, and it's something I've been working on, my whole life. So I was like, okay, whatever. But then she didn't, cut me my check at like the end of a month. And it was a time when it's like every euro counted, like I really was not in a financial position at the time to be like, no, I guess, pay me when you feel like it. And then I just realized, like, you have to stand up for yourself, I mean, when that happened, I was like, well, I have the keys to your office, so I guess I could just walk downstairs and like give it to that sketchy dude who's like hanging around by the corner trying to get people to gamble. Like, whatever you want to do. And it was she was completely shocked. Of course, it was completely crazy. But it was one of those things that I just was like, well, and then I walked out of the office. She gave me, she paid me my paycheck. And I never went back there again. And it was what it was. But one of many times in Italy where sometimes you're put in these situations where you never thought you would come up with things like that. But apparently it worked.
Wow.
Wow. Now you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. But, when you came to Italy to live, did you have some kind of legal standing or legal right to be there? Or were you floating under the radar like I myself did my first couple years in Italy?
So I had a student visa at the time, like through a language school, and then I was able to convert that visa into a work visa through blood, sweat, and tears.
Right.
Like
It sounds easy.
One of those
it sounds easy, but it probably is extremely hard.
Oh, no. We had to get a lawyer, that it was expensive. I heard a lot of no's before I heard a yes. And I remember crying when I found out that like I could actually convert the visa, because I think at the time they were going through some kind of like amnesty of certain work visas. And that's how I was able to get a work visa. And this is like back in 2008, 2009. And as soon as I was able to get that, then, the world kind of opened up. I mean, instead of having to do, because if you're a student, you could work, I think, 20 hours a week at the time. And I was able to get, the famous partita IVA, which is good and bad, and was able to work for myself and get proper contracts. But it was really, really, really difficult, and something that I still think about all the time, because, my father, growing up, he worked as an immigration officer his entire career. So I was well aware of the journey to become how it is trying to become an American citizen and legally work in the US. And I've always known how hard it is. And, all the people who would write him and be like, oh my gosh, thank you so much, Glenn, for helping us with this process, because it was so crazy hard. So I never felt like I could really complain. Of course I did, and try to keep humor as part of it, but I knew that it was much harder for so many other people that, I didn't have to live in Italy. It was a privilege,
Right.
and so I knew that. And there weren't so many examples at the time. Like if you go on Instagram now or TikTok, it's like every second person's like, let me tell you how to move to Italy. There was nothing like that at the time. And if
Right.
anything, at that time, if we were writing about it, we were very cautious to tell people that in general, because I think that there is that knowledge of knowing that, yeah, there might be a way that you can come here legally, and not just through ancestors and things like that. But is this what you really want? Like, do you know what you're getting yourself into? Like, but I still feel that way,
Yeah.
of course.
we
But I definitely, I don't see that as reflected on social media as maybe it should be.
We've definitely had that too, where, because obviously so many people listening to this show have decided to move abroad, and often will send us a note being like, without your show, I would have never done it. And there's always a part of me who, like, that, is biting my fingernails thinking, I hope that works,
Yeah.
I know. I get that sometimes too. Like, you're the reason I moved to Florence. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I really hope that you're okay and everything's good.
Yeah.
Like, it kind of makes things real, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
We used to have a tagline on the show, caution, this show might change your life.
Uh-huh. Yeah, for the
I
good or for
love
the
that.
bad, really. I want
Yeah.
to, okay, I want to jump ahead a little bit just for the time constraint, but so you end up living, staying in Florence, making it work. You get
Yeah.
married, you have a kid. I mean, you can tell us a little more about that if you want. But what I think is also interesting is you've done all of this work to establish yourself in Florence
Mhm.
as Florence in some ways, at least
Yeah.
how people look to you. And then you decide to move to Switzerland. And I remember when that happened, and I was like, what? How can she move to Switzerland? She's girl in Florence. She's in
My name is Florence in the
Florence.
title. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, tell us about that whole thing.
Yeah, I should say, because it sounds like I'm just like a scrappy person that does a bunch of random jobs, but I did eventually, disclaimer out there, start, honing my career after I got my work visa in the sense that, I started writing, interning, and, I've worked at the Florentine. I eventually got a job at Italy Magazine and worked my way up to editor position and worked there for many, many years, along with doing the blog along with freelancing as a social media consultant. So it eventually became, I knew that I wasn't probably going to find my dream job. Like, the dream job back in the day when I first came to Florence was find an admin position at an international university and you're like set for life kind of thing. That was like the dream job in 2000, I don't know, 2006. And then it became kind of like, well, there's this whole world out there, and you just got to create your own job in life. And so I worked really hard to kind of do that, through writing, through making many errors, mistakes, kind of hearing it all. But it definitely helped me become a more resilient person for sure. But I genuinely wanted to share what I hoped was a very authentic side to Italy, and especially Florence. I mean, we live in these cities, you and I, Tiffany, that everyone has this presumption of and this dream of, and they want it, a certain way. And I just feel like I was like, okay, it's my duty as a person to kind of share how it really is, the good, the bad, the help small businesses. Like I was always very passionate about showcasing artisans, small businesses, like truly going to the meat of the story per se, and like meeting people and sharing their stories, because I just felt like that's what I love about, Florence. That's what made me fall in love with the city. And it's not always easy to access that as much as we want to romanticize that over movies, Florence is not a random town in Abruzzo. Like you're not going to meet some Florentine family that's going to welcome you to dinner. I mean, maybe, but it's taken me years to get friends who are Italian and like,
Uh-huh.
really have them open their doors to accept me, being, you're always going to be a little bit of a weirdo to the locals, and that's okay. I'm like totally understand and get that. And so I really, when I met my husband, he was a friend of mine for so many years, and he has such a similar story as me in the sense that, he didn't know he was going to come to Florence. He's French and he's an engineer, so he can work anywhere in the world. And you don't come to Italy thinking like, I'm going to find a badass job. It's going to pay like super well. Like you come here because you love it, and then you stay despite of the bad salaries. So, for him, he found a French company and here that he's been working and he now works with again. And I'll explain more of that. But yeah, we just wanted to, Italy was home for both of us, and we never thought we would leave. Both of us were fully in it to win it. And then COVID happened. Like so many people during COVID, well, of course, for me, that totally affected my work to some extent. I mean, I was still writing and working for Italy Magazine, but all the content at that time was rules, regulations, what zones of Italy. And it was actually it completely turned into something very serious very quickly. And I think we were both going through like an existential crisis in general of kind of like, well, okay, are we gonna like, is this gonna be life? Like, what happens if tourism doesn't come back, or we don't have as illustrious careers anymore? And like, there was no clue on how things were going to pan out. And honestly, even before COVID, both of us were kind of like at a point in our jobs and our careers where we're like, we kind of want to change. We've been doing the same thing for a decade. we really, and we were trying to have a child, and that was a difficult process for us, which I've shared in my writing as well. And that also kind of colored it as well, because I kind of thought, well, I think I just need a change in general. Like I love Italy, but I can also, having your entire working career in Italy, I felt like I needed to actually experience, I need to go backwards. Like everybody has a corporate career in the US or the UK. They're like, okay, now I come to Italy. I'm doing the opposite, basically, the reverse. Like, okay, I did that. And now I actually want to see what corporate life is like. And, totally different experience. So Nico got a job offer in Switzerland. And before we went there, which was on my birthday in 2020, I never even visited. Like it was the first time I had been there was the day we moved there, and which is crazy. And I was
It's
totally
crazy.
terrified. Like nothing about it was, you know, easy. It was just like, okay, I guess I'm gonna just blow up my job, and just see what happens. But at the time, my priority was having a family. And I felt like I was in a place where I'm not good at saying no to things. I was all about like, okay, I got to go to this event. I got to travel. There's this work trip here. I have a hard time saying no. And I needed that. I needed to slow down and go somewhere where, okay, let's look at the beautiful lake and take a walk in the mountains. And that's exactly what our life was like over there. So it was a happy accident. And I was totally terrified that I couldn't continue Girl in Florence anymore or pivot to whatever that would be in Switzerland. But it was a great 3 years. Like we were there for exactly 3 years, and it was a wonderful time, I have to admit.
And why in the world did you? I mean, starting over again is so hard. I felt that
Yeah,
even just
crazy.
living briefly in Rome and then moving to San Francisco and then back to Seattle, even that felt hard. So why did you decide to not stay in Switzerland after making all that effort to, in that 3 years to get used to being there? Why not just settle in?
Yeah, good question. Sometimes I ask myself that still. I mean, I fully put all the efforts to integrate in Switzerland. I instantly was like, okay, I guess I'll be girl in Zug as well as girl in Florence, and try and do freelance writing over there. I started working with some corporate clients. I hired a business coach. I was totally ready to pivot my career at that point. It's like, okay, I'm ready for, like, I've been writing about Italy. I like it, but I'm ready for a change. Like, I'm actually excited to dive into other things. And so I started doing that. And as soon as that happened, because of course I'm not counting the time then when I had my daughter, I took my maternity leave. You know how it is. It's like a crazy, and over there, the system, Switzerland is not Sweden. It's not like they have this super generous paternity maternity package. It's kind of like a mix between Europe and the US, and it's kind of a conservative culture in that sense where it's a lot of times one parent stays at home, and there's kind of this, not everybody has a kid in daycare. Sometimes people can be kind of judgy about that. It's my personal experience, of course, but I kind of wasn't expecting that. And I also found German really hard to learn, because the expectation was not just learning German, but learning Swiss German, which is a completely different language.
Completely
So,
different, I've heard.
and my brain was fried. I just had a kid. Already Italian and French is difficult for me. And I just found it really difficult. And I tried my best. Like I did take courses. I have, a very basic understanding of German, but after a couple of years, I was kind of like, I don't know, if we stay here, which would be the right thing to do, because in fact they call Switzerland golden handcuffs, because it financially just makes sense to be there if you have a job and you're doing well, because you're well taken care of in that sense. And it's hard to leave, but I can't live in a place and not speak the language and not integrate completely. And that would have always been a bit of a struggle. That being said, I never actually said I wanted to move back to Italy. What happened is my husband got a job offer to come back to Florence at his old company, and it was a high enough position for us to be like, oh my God, we can't say no to that. This might never happen again, and even though it was crazy and most people were like, are you sure you want it? Especially in Switzerland, they did not get, I think people took that as an insult almost, like, well, what? You're gonna go back to Italy? Like you're gonna work better in Italy?
I know that, I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm someone who obviously clearly adores Italy. And I get it. I get all the reasons to love Italy. There are a
Yeah.
lot. But when I watched your sort of Swiss journey, and especially when you moved to your second place that had, I feel like out the
Yeah.
window, it was like a screensaver
Yeah.
out your side window. It was like that what one screensaver where you've got the mountains and then you've got like a little church and the green hills.
Yeah.
And then on the other side you had, the lake. And I just thought, how could you leave that? I couldn't, I mean, and this is me as an, slightly, I don't want to say older to describe myself, but let's say a little bit more mature person than I was when I first moved to Italy. My priorities have clearly shifted, and having a child myself, I think, is part of it. But I just thought, I, how could you, how could you leave that? It's like, it looks like paradise. But of course,
Yeah.
everyone's version of paradise is different. And I totally get what you're saying about the language. And actually, I wanted to ask you about language because your daughter, I don't, was she born in Italy or in Switzerland?
In Switzerland.
In Switzerland. So here she is. I mean, a child who is half American, American mother, French father, but both of her parents have this Italian background and have lived in Italy for so many years and growing up in a German part of Switzerland. And I just thought, how many languages does she
Crazy.
speak? And and I know children are incredibly able to handle multiple languages, but I'm just like, what is the language dynamic in that house? What language are they speaking at home? What language is the child learning when she's out in the city? Like, tell us about that.
Yeah, I grew up I should be bilingual, but I'm now I would say technically trilingual, but I grew up in a bilingual household, let's say. My mother's from Mexico, my father's in the US. So but at that time and era, it was less of a thing to be like making that an important feature in life, like becoming bilingual. And my parents are divorced, so that was part of it too. So for me, I've always thought a lot about this. Well, one day having kids and like, what do I want to do language wise? Especially if I marry somebody who's not American, which I knew after leaving the US and moving to Europe, I was like, that's probably going to be the case. So, when we had her, and of course, I always make fun of my husband. I'm like, you had to pick the one place in Switzerland where we don't speak the language. Like, we speak French, we speak Italian. Why are we not going to the place where we would easily fit in 1 second, right? We gotta pick a whole new language, and just dive into that. Our daughter, we've always been I think it's one parent, one language, where I've only speak English to Annabelle and Nico only speaks French. And then she hears the third language out and about, at school. And so when we were in Switzerland, it was German, Swiss German. And so we never really knew how good her Swiss German was because we didn't speak it ourselves for the most part. We just knew from like school what the teachers would tell us, or if she, was running a crazy fever, we had to run into the hospital. That was the times when I actually knew she was able to understand German because they'd be talking and she would be like, nodding her head, and I'm like, oh my God.
So cute.
We just saw this like future of her translating for us, being our translator, which happens a lot, I think in so many multilingual households. And we never really had like a crazy plan. I didn't read so many books on that because I didn't want to put the pressure on us either. I just want like, what can we honestly consistently do? We can do this. We can speak our languages because we understand each other's languages. And then, when we came to Italy, I was very concerned about that as well because I'm like, poor thing, here now she's had 2.5 years of learning this third language. And then now we're like, well, scrap that, and we'll just replace that with Italian. So we put her in a bilingual school as soon as we came here. And yeah, so now that we moved back in 2023 in fall, and her Italian's pretty good. So like her English and French is perfect, and it's perfect as it could be for an almost 4-year-old. I mean, she still says
Right.
breakfast.
Breakfast. Yeah.
But she sings in Italian. The kids at school, the teachers speak to them in English, but they all speak Italian to each other. So I always say, like, I think the parents are upset at her school because Annabelle's just learned Italian. Like all the other kids aren't speaking as much English, but she's learned Italian in the meantime. But it makes sense, like we're living in Italy and she absorbs so much and we're not, we don't have like this crazy plan. And, I just want her to be happy and like for all of us to just kind of be on this journey together without pressure. And she's thriving, like she really, I think she thinks it's fun to speak the different languages, and she started correcting my French recently, which is embarrassing. So we've
Yeah.
already gotten that. I can only imagine in the future
Oh,
how much more fun that's going to be.
my son corrects my Italian all the time. And I have lived in Italy for 20 years and he's only been alive for 9 years. And so I'm like, I should be speaking better than you at this point. Like, why do you speak so much better, So I get that. Do you and your husband, this is just my own personal curiosity, even before you moved to Switzerland, before you had a child, what was your common language? I always assumed it was Italian, but
It's a mix, English
it's a
and Italian.
mix.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like we've always mixed. I mean, French was not really a thing. In fact, it's so funny. I'm like, oh, now I realize you're French for the first time. It's actually speaking it because Annabelle's around. But I mean, he speaks his language skills are really, really, really good. People don't even think he's French. Like when you meet Nico, now he has Italian citizenship, and actually thank God he got it. And I think about like how the world is at the moment. I'm like, well, that was really helpful for us to move back logistically. Even if he's part of the EU, it still was a lot easier thanks to the fact that he's an Italian citizen, and so is my daughter. Me, no, not yet. Working on that. Putting together all the paperwork.
Uh-huh. Wow.
Tiffany popping in. If current events in the United States or wherever you live have been getting you down, I suggest getting some travel plans on the horizon. I don't know about you, but if I have an exciting trip to look forward to, my whole day is just a little bit sunnier. Katie and I are planning our 2025 Roman adventure for this coming October, the 5th to the 11th. This will be our third time hosting this unforgettable and really magical trip. We have had such an amazing time and such an amazing response from our guests these past 2 years to this trip that we put together that we feel is truly out of the ordinary. This is not your typical Roman trip. This is, first of all, a very small group of people. We're capping it at 14 people this year, and it'll probably be closer to 10. We're staying at a beautiful, luxurious hotel where I got married, by the way. That's how beautiful this place is. We will be taking you personally to some of the most exquisite, beautiful sights of Rome, many of which are so rare and so unknown that even though the city might be crowded, we will be almost alone in some of these places. Katie and I pride ourselves on our knowledge of Rome, our deep understanding of its culture and its art, and the secrets that most people don't know about. If you'd like to spend a week in Rome with us and with a handful of other listeners in this beautiful hotel, then come to Rome with us in October. It will be an unforgettable trip, and it might just be one of the best trips of your life, as some of our previous guests have told us it was. Get in touch with us on our website, thebittersweetlife.net, or you can send us an email, bittersweetlifepodcast@gmail.com, and we're happy to answer all of your questions. The dates again are the 5th to the 11th of October. Rooms are filling up, and it's a very, very small group, so if you'd like to come with us to discover a side of Rome that most people will never see, then get in touch, and we'll see you in October. Ciao. I have got to ask you about the Italian driver's license exam.
Oh my God. Oh.
Because I've been there. And so I saw you, I watched your process going through this, and I just thought, like, every time someone I know has to do this, I just think, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that you have this in front of
Still
you.
triggering.
It is. It's one of those things where it's like, I don't think about it very much anymore, but every so often I'm like, oh, thank God I've done this. Thank God I don't have to do it again. So tell us a little bit about your experiences.
Oh my God. Horrible. I mean, guys, I've been driving since I was like 15. I grew up in Texas. They were basically, as soon as I could even look like I could possibly drive a car, they're like, here you go, love. And I drive stick shift. You know, I have always learned how to do that from the very beginning because my dad was very, okay, you need to learn how to drive stick shift because the rest of the world uses those kinds of cars. So that was never a problem. But and in Switzerland, I was able to convert my license. They have a reciprocal agreement with the US, so that was not an issue
Nice.
at all. When we were living in Italy before, I was living in the center of Florence, so I didn't have to drive basically. But I always wanted to get my license. But it's one of those things you're just like, okay, I'll do it, and then I'll sign up for
Mhm.
the school, but I'm not going to do the lessons because it's kind of scary. And you start realizing how daunting the task is the second you start to really look at the book, and you're like, holy, this is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And I've done a lot of hard things in life. And this one took the cake. It was extremely hard. I definitely failed a couple of times.
Can you, for
I
those of
think,
us who have never had to take it, can
yeah,
you give us an example of what makes it harder than an American or anywhere else driving test?
for example, you have to know certain components of the engine and how the engine works. So it's not as simple as knowing this is a blinker light. You have to know exactly how not just the oil change, but like why, and the pressures of different parts of the engine. You have to know what to do if somebody gets glass stuck in their eye after an accident. You have to anticipate so many scenarios that hopefully you don't see. But to the point where you start to go crazy a little bit. I started doing the practice quizzes pretty early on, and I realized this is there's a million different ways I could get this right or wrong. Because you have to.
Mm.
It's also the Italian language, the double negatives, the tricky
Yes.
kind of, oh, is it all or is it some? I would always get tripped up by so many different things, and then of course later you're like, oh my gosh, that was actually kind of obvious, but so many
What about
technical. Oh,
what about the intersections, the little drawings of like the seven road intersections, and you're like, which car has the right of way? A, B,
Tiffany.
C. And you had to put them in order of which car has the right of way. For me, that was like
Yeah,
the closest thing to like, I don't know, nuclear physics that I've ever gotten. I mean, it was just, how would you know? Like how it doesn't, I
so
have no
happy you
idea.
said that. No, that was that. You know what? You want to know something? That was the hardest part of the test for me. I was having meltdowns because I could not figure out the right of way at those little intersections. And they would always put an intersection where it was just crazy in general, right? Like everybody's got to turn left and right at the same time. And so I was getting those questions wrong every single time, even though they make it seem so obvious. Well, of course, if you have the right of way free, then you have precedence. Well, all of them look like they do. So what do you want me to
Yeah.
do here? So I actually had Nico sit down, and we spent days just going through diagrams, going over it and over it and over, because he's European. He knows how to study like a European.
Hmm.
So just like really just kind of hours of very intense theoretical reasoning. And I've never done that. That's never how I've studied or, worked in life. And I just had to like go over the diagrams a million times until it kind of became second nature. And that was the only way I was able to pass ultimately, is by taking it that seriously. Like, okay, that's my job. Nothing else matters in life. The groceries, work, whatever, everything takes a backseat to this.
It is so, so hard. And I failed as well my first time. And I took it with the driving school. I don't know if you did as well,
Yeah.
but like
Yeah, I did as
you
well. But I
kind of
didn't
have
do
you
lessons at the school. I just did
I
like the
didn't either.
online
I
Zoom,
didn't either.
whatever.
I only did the practice lessons because you have to do the
Yeah.
like the driving lessons. But I also had to because I didn't know how to drive stick shift. So I had to learn how to drive stick in the city of Rome.
Wow, that sounds
It's like Hunger
awful.
Games. It's like Hunger Games. Like it just looks
Yeah.
like you're destined for failure by starting in a place where everybody's like, well, those are the rules, but we're not going to follow any of those.
Yes, we're not going to follow them though. That's the thing. That's the ironic
No.
thing about the Italian driver's
Yeah.
license test is that it is so hard, and yet you've got some of the worst drivers. Not the worst drivers. It's not that they're bad drivers, it's that they ignore all of the rules.
Yeah.
They're actually very defensive and they have very good reflexes,
Oh yeah.
but they
Totally
are
agree.
they don't know the rules and they break all the rules, and it's so ironic to me that the driving license test is so hard when the drivers are the way that they are. Maybe they're like revolting, I
It
guess.
feels unsafe to follow the rules. And keep in mind, my driving school is very like no, you take your time, you follow you do all the things correctly. And while meanwhile, everyone passing by is just cutting people off. I didn't even know that there was a European roundabout and an Italian one. And guess what? The rules in both are the opposite.
Oh,
One you have the
really?
right of way, one you don't. And so
Did
it's
not
just
know
like
that.
learning all of this random, like, I'm gonna forget it immediately. But it has made me a better driver driving here, I have to say, because of all the reasons you mentioned. You have to drive how everyone else is driving and kind of like follow. But the roads that we have near my house are crazy. A two-way that should be a one-way. I have to back up down crazy steep driveways, and like, I mean, I should get a license alone just for that. The road I take my daughter to school. It's like you should just
Yeah.
get issued one immediately for that reason alone. But I
Yes.
kind of enjoy it.
I kind of do too, but I worry about myself, and I don't drive in the States very much, but I
Mhm.
worry like when I'm driving in the States, like I have to really make a switch because I can't drive there like the way that I drive in Italy. You just can't
I
do it.
know.
And I was in LA a couple of years ago, and I'd been driving in Italy, thinking I can handle LA. And I had to turn left onto a four-lane street, two lanes going each way, and I was having to turn left, and then I had to immediately turn right. And I was having like a panic attack because nobody would let me in. Nobody.
Mm-hmm.
Not a single freaking person would let me in. And I was like, if I was in Rome, I would just drive out into the road and everybody would have to stop. And they might honk, but they'd be like, whatever, I've done this a million times too. So whatever. I feel like
Yeah.
in Italy, the rule is live and let live with the driving. And
Yeah.
I actually appreciate that about them because like they're like,
Me too.
whatever, like, okay, you cut me off, but you know you've done it too. So you just kind of shrug.
Everybody participates in the madness.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Tiffany, if it makes you feel any better, I think it's particularly bad in California as far as
Yeah.
people not letting you in. It definitely feels like a California issue. Uh, from,
It's the opposite of Switzerland, by the way. That was also kind of jarring, was just going from a place where like you'd be walking, by the crosswalk and cars would preemptively stop because they're so careful over there. So it's like the second you drive from Switzerland into Italy, you're like, whoa, everything's changed.
yeah.
I still do that with the pedestrians though, even in Rome because I was a
Yeah.
pedestrian for so long. I'm good to the pedestrians.
Me too. I always stop and to the chagrin of all the other drivers who are pissed that I'm like
Yeah.
letting a family
And the
across the road.
right, and the pedestrians are always like waving, like, thank you for
Yeah,
letting me
it's so
walk across the
grateful.
crosswalk. It's like, I have to.
I have one more question for you that I must know.
Sure.
So after this sojourn in Switzerland and now coming back to Florence, has your feeling about Florence changed from before you went there to coming home?
I mean, a lot of it has to do maybe less with the change and more with age. I mean, I came in my early 20s. Now I just turned 40. I have a family. So obviously also looking at things in a lens of that. Now I'm thinking about like our life as a family as opposed to, I didn't have to think about much before except for myself. So it was really kind of like overwhelming for me to come back to Italy and go, well, what are we going to do if we don't have, a support system and families nearby? And I was really stressed by a lot of things coming back. And I definitely took a lot of things more personally than I probably should have as far as bureaucracy, like not knowing and having done that before. I can look at it now in 2025 and go, yeah, I mean, I definitely had some meltdowns for the change. And also Florence too. I think part of me was slightly disappointed that during COVID, there was so much talk of like changing Florence and kind of what do we want Florence to be post-COVID when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to mass crowds and that kind of thing. And I kind of, came back and I was like, it doesn't look like any of that has happened. It's like how it was before. As far as, housing and work and things like that, it just, coming back, it was extremely hard for us to find a place. We bought an apartment before we left to Switzerland, but it's a tiny apartment, like it's not somewhere we could live coming back. And we just, even for us alone, to find a place was so hard because of the lack of affordable housing in Florence. And it's a real problem, probably in Rome too, probably in all of the cities that we live in actually.
Mm-hmm.
But I find it, I just part of me was kind of like, oh, Florence, you kind of had this chance to, I don't know, work things a little differently and, care about the needs of the residents a little bit more. And so, and there are a lot of positive things going on too. There's more trams in the works and things like that. And Florence is still, for me, again, home. It's the place I love the most. But of course, the place you love the most is the place that you're going to go, okay, but you guys could work on A, B, and C. So, I see it definitely differently. I'm not the kind of, okay, I need to find like the hottest new restaurants and bars. Like my priorities in life have changed. And now I'm looking at like parks and gardens and picnics and, what's easy with Annabelle but also just like, what do I want out of life kind of thing? Like I'm thinking much more about the future than I ever did before. One thing I love about Italy is that you live in the moment so much, even I love that we can still be spontaneous here. Whereas living in Switzerland, I felt like I had to schedule everything a month, 2 months, 6 months in advance. It's not really my personality, even if I like to be on time and do things a certain way. I actually love it when people are like, "Hey, what do you like? Let's get the kids over for aperitivo tonight." And great. Sometimes having that diary date in the calendar stresses me out, whereas like just doing something spontaneously is almost easier. So yeah, I mean, it's Florence is still Florence. It's going to have I was walking through the city today and going, oh, it's so beautiful. We're so lucky. Spring. It's full of wisteria. Everything's beautiful. But then, you're passing through massive amount of tour groups and crowds on any given moment. So I mean, that's never changed. So it's just it's just evolving in a slightly different way. I think all of the challenges that Italy faces at the moment are things that could possibly, be worked on, if people think in more sustainable terms. And I really hope that the local governments, take the forefront on that, because I feel like there's too much like tourists need to do the right thing. And I'm like, no, the city governments need to do the right thing. They're the ones who make the laws when it comes to affordable housing or Airbnbs or how many cruise ships can land at the dock, and they have arguably more power than, that person who's choosing between to stand in line for a panino or going, to another place. So we'll see.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. It's so fun to actually finally have you on the show. How should people
My pleasure.
How should people find you? Obviously, we'll put some links in the show notes, but what would you want people to know?
Yeah, so I obviously still have the website and my social media accounts, All Girl in Florence, but I recently, as in the past 6 months, have opened up a Substack, and that goes by my name, Georgette Jupe. And I can send you guys a link. And that's been really fun. I think that I had writer's block for a couple of years just because of all of these changes. So it's kind of nice to hop onto another platform and, just join a community of writers again. I miss that.
Oh, that's so great. Well, we'll have to have you back on, because personally, I would like to hear more about this time working for D-list actors in LA.
Oh, I have some stories. I have some stories about that, let me tell you. And wrestlers, professional wrestlers.
Oh gosh. All right, well,
it gets better.
All right, well, we will leave it there for now. And of course, you're welcome back anytime. And until next time, this is The Bittersweet Life. I'm Katie Sewell.
I'm Tiffany Parks.
Join us again. Bye. If you love the show, help spread the word to others by giving us a quick 5-star review wherever you listen. We love reading your comments and compliments. They are like fuel to the work. Thanks for taking the time.